Welcome back to another reading and correcting of Stepping Up with me, Kindar, the Tiger Writes, and Ty, the Tiger Supervisor. Today, we are doing Chapter 70. I don't like this, Don grumbled, staying close to the alley's wall. I shouldn't be putting myself at risk like this. I'm the leader of this whole thing. Tibs glared, Jackal silent. He and the fighter were accompanying Don and his steed to Sebastian's house. They told Don it was to help, but this was what both had been worried about, although they had picked up an unexpected ally within Don's team. They need to see you be part of this, Don, Radcliffe said, glancing into the alley's intersection. Like you said, you're the leader. You think any of them would be doing their part without you here showing them how it's done? Don straightened, and when Radcliffe motioned for them to move forward, he gave Tibs an amused smile. The attack on Sebastian's house had been simple to push through. Destroying your enemy's base of operation was a sound strategy, and they now had someone who could get them through the magical defenses of the building, with Don's and his element. That was when things had gotten complicated for Tibs. With realizing the plan needed him to be on the front line, Don had become reticent. Actually, you know what? Reticent. Just that. Reticent, even if, until then, he'd been more than happy to take the credit for it. He wasn't loud in his resistance until he understood that what he had to maintain the illusion he was behind the plan to keep people looking up to him, but he kept trying modifications that allowed him to do his part at a distance. Jackal had had a hard time staying silent and confronted with the sorcerer's cowardliness. And while Quigley had no problem remaining friendly as he tried to keep Don on point, he never cared what people thought of him. Tibs had stayed out of it because he didn't know anything about strategy, but despaired of the plan falling apart until Radcliffe had joined in the manipulation. The rogue had been able to word things so it made Don sound more important for being with them. He talked about Don's leadership, his wisdom, and his charisma. At no point did Radcliffe say Don needed his ego fed, but Tibs, that was clearly what he was saying. And it worked, although they had to keep reminding Don how important his place in the plan was. So Watt climbed down from the roof and took up her bow. There's a group of 2 intersections ahead. I counted 6. She was a conscript who graduated to Epsilon the day before Stowe closed its doors. Don had made her part of his team since his official archer had yet to return. She had air as her element. If sent 7, not that one person without an element would change how this fight went. Jackal, Don said, once they're in sight, you and Raoul will crush them. Radcliffe and Tibs are on the roofs to flank them. Sawat, find a vantage point and shoot at anyone trying to run. Don't worry about kill shots. Once they're down, we'll make sure that they're out. Tibs was up the wall the moment Don stopped giving instruction. The direct line to the roof he wanted wasn't possible, as the alley was wider than he could jump. Then he noticed Radcliffe was heading away, and the others were moving slowly on the ground. Even Sawat was staying there for the moment. Without anyone to see him, he ran for the large gap, already anticipating how fun that was going to be. He threw himself over the void and channeled air to push him further, only managing to keep his glee to a chuckle as he realized He threw himself over the void and channeled air to push himself further, only managing to keep his glee to a chuckle as he realized that even with that, he wasn't going to make it. He set a sense ahead, hardened it, stepped and leaped again, arms wide as he pirouetted the rest of the way. He landed and posed for the crowd that wasn't there, and his momentum sent him tumbling down the angled roof. With an oops at his miscalculation and a laugh, he was over the side and falling. He switched to earth and hardened himself only seconds before the impact. He remained there. Being still was comfortable, right? Being still was when he thought best, considered his action. He had to act, but he should never be hasty. Haste led to him falling off roofs. but he did have to act. He let go of the essence, then hurried up the other wall. Two more leaps placed him on the opposite side of the attack as Jackal and Rao started. He threw a knife at the woman's back as she engaged with Rao, but the pommel hit instead of the blade. He hated how bad he was at throwing when he didn't have his essence to help. Tibs was down, short sword in hand, and joined in the fight by cutting a fighter's back open. Then he was backhanded and he was on the ground. Stay there, Radcliffe called as their fighters stepped in this direction, and be ready. As the sword went up for a strike, a loop of rope fell around it and tightened at the wrist as the rogue pulled on it. The fighter staggered off balance and Tiff planted his sword in the man's side. Then, when that didn't make the man fall, he twisted it, pulled it, and planted it there again. The man fell, taking Tibbs' sword with him. He had a knife in hand and stood and looked for a target. The only one still alive wasn't any more as Jackal slammed a foot down on his neck. Injuries? The fighter asks. That bastard sliced my armor, Raoul complained, looking at his side and the cut hard leather. And it was my first time wearing it in a fight. Lot left a small line going down his pants from there. Good to hear, Ratcliffe said. Me too. Tibbs picked up his knife. Haven't you been practicing with those? The rogue asked, trying not to chuckle. Tibbs gave him a mock glare. That's why I have this too. He pulled the sword out of the body and sheathed it. You should have brought a cleric, Pickle said, catching Tibbs' attention. He shook his head. The cut was too visible for him to wrap it, and I'm fine, it's just a scratch. There was more than that. Tibbs could sense as much. Tibbs could sense as much. Well, the fighter's essence was doing something. Tibbs couldn't sense that much. But the fighter's essence was doing something around the wound that was slowing the bleeding. Arao had metal as his element. Tibbs didn't understand how that could be healing him. He opened his mouth to ask and stopped himself. Now was not the time to give in to his curiosity. Good fighting, Don said, handing a clean cloth to the fighter. Bandage that so you don't bleed out before we're done. I'm fine, the fighter insisted, but took it as the sorcerer glared. It would have worked as is, but Tibbs was the only one able to tell the fighter was right, and Rao had been on Don's team long enough. Any protest, he died when those eyes settled on him. If they weren't such a coward, one of them would be here to help us, Don grumbled. They and the attendants are nothing more than leeches. The least those could have done was transport us to your father's house and wait to take us back. That way we wouldn't have to risk our lives for a sorry hide just getting there. Tibbs agreed with him about the attendants. It had been one part of Don's plan everyone had eagerly agreed to, except the attendants. They claimed that they couldn't make it any closer than 3 blocks and pointed to the injured attendants as proofs of action had that line well defended. No amount of insisting had changed their minds. The alternate plan was for a massive attack on all fronts, to provide the needed distraction for Dawn to take down the magic protecting the house. They made it another block before the next fight. Then, as they moved closer, Tibbs felt something. He slowed, trying to understand what it was. The essences were still around him, but it had a different quality to it. Can you feel that? Ratcliffe asked, stopping by the mouth of the alley. We're about 3 blocks from the house, Sawat said. I think this is what has been stopping the attendants. Then how am I feeling it? The rogue asked. I'm fire, not void. And I'm air, the archer asked. The archer replied metal. Proud said water. Tibbs added, I'm not feeling anything. Jekyll said. You can't sense that? Don asked in an incredible tone. I thought you couldn't do anything. I can sense how my essence... I can sense my essence fine. Tibs replied, I just don't have a lot in my reserve to use. The sorcerer's smirk didn't last as he looked ahead of them. If this is affecting all our elements, we'd better turn back and come up with a plan that accounts for it. We can't, Jekyll said. Come off it, Don. We all know why everyone's committed, Radcliffe said, cutting Jekyll off. If we're this close, then so are the others, and Sebastian has to have figured out what we're doing. If we have them turn back, it's going to be a fighting retreat, and I can't see that man stopping once he has us cowering at the inn. Cowering back at the inn. Can you, Don? He'd watch as he felt the essence coalesce around the sorcerer. There was a sluggishness to how it accumulated, but it was still corruption. Tibbs hadn't seen Don use it in a fight, but nothing the sorcerer did with it would be pleasant. I'm not a coward, Don stated. Never said you were, Jekyll said. Stop talking, Tibbs ordered the fighter as Don ran on him. Stop talking, he repeated. Jekyll closed his mouth and Don turned to glare on Tibbs. You better keep him under control or I'm turning him into a puddle. Tibbs nodded. Don looked at his hand and the essence moved around it. The way it's affecting me, I'm not going to be useful in the coming battle. In the coming battles. And since I'm the only one able to take down the enchantments on the house, it means you're all going to have to work harder at keeping me safe. He looked at the house in the house's direction and missed the mix of glaring and roll of the eyes. Since enchantments are essence-based, whatever is causing this will have to end before we reach the house. It might be why there's so many people between here and the house. He wants to make sure we can't figure out that closer we'll be able to fully access our elements again. Elements. Again. Tibbs hoped so, because the way his range on his senses abruptly ended one block away didn't make him confident about the rest of the plan. His reserve was vast, but he had to be able to channel the essence out of himself to be able to use it. Me and Rao take point, Jekyll said. Tibbs and Radcliffe on each of Don's side. So what? You have our rear. Stay far enough that you can fire at anyone that needs taking down. How are you for arrows? I'm down to half my quiver, said without looking at them. There hasn't been a lot of archers on the way for me to replenish from. Don't count on that continuing. My father's going to have sent word to those at the platform to hit us from behind. So stay alert. He looked at Don. It's the best protection we can manage with who we have. Does that work? Don's nod was curt and took position. Our goal is the house, the sorcerer said as they started moving. Don't waste time going after anyone to kill them. So long as we destroy their leader, it doesn't matter if they live or die anymore. That means no stopping to collect loot, Tibbs told Jekyll. I'm hurt, Tibbs, Fighter replied, his tone comically pained. You know the loot collecting takes place after the fighting's done, not on the way to it. When he continued, his tone was serious, and the loot I want is what I'll get from my father's house once we've chased them away. You guys can come back and loot the bodies. Instead of moving forward with him, Tibbs' senses continued to stop as they moved closer to the house. Then it was like it was being pushed back when he tried to sense around him. This had to be what it felt for Jekyll. When he focused hard, he could make out how the essence shook as if it tried, and if he tried to mentally take hold of some, it flew away. Tibbs, Jekyll called, having continued to walk later. Tibbs was the only one still stopped. The others had gotten over their surprise already. So what made a face as she reached him, his distant, when he hurried to rejoin the others. The next fight was harder. They hit the 9 thugs together and immediately they were on the defensive as only Tibbs didn't reflexively reach for essence, and only Jekyll was able to do anything with his body turning gray as it hardened. Tibbs attacked with his sword, but was at a disadvantage against the larger and stronger fighter until Rao was there to help him. Then the fighter's swords broke. When the fighter's sword broke, he used a pommel to bludgeon the thug, then took one of theirs. Tibbs gazed at the fighter's face and went to help Radcliffe take down his opponent. Once the fighting was done, even Jackal had injuries. Tibs was cut and bruised. Looks like whatever this is, Jackal said, our bodies counter it like it does in the dungeon. No, Don replied. In the dungeon, our presence would create a space around us that's safe from the dungeon's influence. Rauno would have been able to use his essence on his sword there. He wrapped his essence around his injuries. The bruises reacted normally to it, but cuts didn't stop bleeding. As the essence was ripped away. Okay, that needs to be reworked. But the essence was ripped away as it reaches the surface of his skin. So the cuts. So Watt won them the next fight as she took down 6 of the thugs by the time Jackal reached him. Tibs took a sword in the side for Dawn, and the sorcerer grabbed the sword's arm. The swordman's arm as the other attacker swung again, melting it into a purple mass as Radcliffe sliced the sword. At this point, I can go the man's throat. "Let me fine," Tibs said as Dawn helped him to his feet. Couldn't stop the bleeding, but wrapping his essence over the injury within his body slowed it. "Don't bleed to death." Dawn handed him a clean cloth and raised his voice. "We can move essence into someone else through touch." "I guess a cleric would have been useful after all," Jackal said. Tibs winced as he used his armor to hold the cloth pressed against his injury. Dawn snorted. "They'd have run off at the first battle. Cowards, the lot of them." They continued, slowed by the injuries. The next fight was nearly their last, even if they were only fighting 6 thugs. So Watt only injured 1 with the 2 arrows she had left, and while Jackal and Rao kept 3 busy, 2 rushed Tibs and Radcliffe. 2 rushed Tibs, Radcliffe, and Dawn. The rogues took them down, and Tibs only got another cut from the fight. But as Radcliffe pushed his opponent off him, he had a sword in his gut. Cursing, Tibs dropped next to him and put his hand over the wound, pushing his essence in, covering the internal injuries, but the blood escaping Radcliffe's body didn't slow. He took the cloth Don gave him and put it over, and immediately it was so. "Fuck." Radcliffe chuckled and really thought the dungeon was what would get me. "You're not dying," Tibs said, as blood started dripping off the cloth. "You better pull this off," Radcliffe said, "because it's going to suck if I died for nothing." "No dying," Tibs ordered, pushing more and more essence in. "Why wasn't this working?" "You better help him," Tibs glared at the other rogue. "I said no dying. You aren't allowed to die outside the dungeon." "That's true," Radcliffe said, his voice growing softer. "So I'm just going to nap. Wake me when..." His body sagged. Tibs pushed more essence in. This couldn't happen. They were runners. The dungeon was where they died. They tried to beat Stowe, and when they failed, they died. The town was where they were safe. The town was where they went to rest, to be safe. Fighting wasn't allowed in the town. Fought back the tears as his essence was ripped away from him inside Radcliffe's body. He wasn't going to cry this time. He got up. This time, he was going to get even. "I'm going to kill him," he told Jackal as he walked by him. This concludes Chapter 70 of Stepping Up. If you are enjoying this, please leave a like. If you want to know when the next chapter is going to be posted, subscribe and hit the bell. If you want to read the story, it's on Royal Road for free. If you want to support me and read ahead of Royal Road, that's on my Patreon. If you want to listen to me doing these live, it's on Twitch every Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Time. All the links are in the notes. And with that, I wish you a good day.